The morning Clara Bennett arrived in Silver Ridge, Colorado, the stagecoach driver dropped her trunk in the mud and didn't look back. She stood there on the main street with her worn leather suitcase pressed against her leg, mud already soaking through the hem of her skirt, and watched the stage roll away like it had somewhere better to be. Which it did. Everywhere was better than Silver Ridge in February, when the wind came off the mountains like it had a grudge, and the townspeople moved through the cold with their eyes aimed at the ground. Clara had $41 and some loose change. She had the address of her Uncle Harold's house written in pencil on a folded envelope. She had a letter he'd sent her 8 months ago, promising that if things got too hard back east, she should come. Come out here, Clara. There's room, and there's work, and nobody cares what you left behind. Harold Bennett had been dead for 6 weeks by the time she stepped off that stage. She didn't know that yet. She would know it within the hour, and the knowing of it would be the loneliest she had ever felt in her 29 years of living. But first, before any of that, she needed to find him. If this story already has you gripping your seat, you're exactly where you should be. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Silver Ridge. The town was smaller than the letter had made it sound. One main street with a general store, a feed barn, a hotel that had seen better decades, and a saloon operating at full capacity even at 10 in the morning. Clara passed a woman sweeping her porch who looked up, evaluated her in about 3 seconds, and went back to sweeping without a word. She passed two men arguing in front of the hardware store, loudly enough that people across the street could hear every insult, and neither of them paused to acknowledge the stranger walking by with a suitcase and a confused expression. She found the land office at the end of the block and pushed the door open. The man behind the counter was somewhere in his 60s, thick around the middle, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles pushed up on his forehead. He had a stack of papers he was very busy ignoring when Clara walked in, and he looked up with the particular expression of a man who had been interrupted doing nothing. "I'm looking for Harold Bennett," she said. "He lives out on—" She unfolded the envelope. "Sycamore Creek Road. Could you tell me how far that is from here?" The man's expression shifted. "Not a lot. Just enough." "You family of Harolds? I'm his niece. I've come from Pennsylvania. He wrote me, 'Sit down, miss.'" She didn't sit down. She didn't like the way he said it. What happened to him? It wasn't a question. She'd heard that particular tone of voice before. At her mother's funeral. At her father's. At the edge of too many rooms where bad news was being carefully managed. She knew what came before the sitting down. "Harold passed," the man said. He had the decency to take the spectacles off his forehead and hold them in his hands. 6 weeks ago, heart gave out. It was quick, they said. He paused. "I'm sorry, miss. I am. He was a decent man." Clara didn't say anything. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" He was already reaching for something on his desk, the practical concern of a small-town official who did not want a destitute woman becoming someone's problem. "The hotel on 4th. Thank you," she said, and she walked back out. The cold hit her like a hand flat against her face. She stood on the wooden sidewalk with people moving around her on either side, and she did the arithmetic in her head the way she'd learned to do it, fast and clear, without letting the numbers frighten her until she'd counted them all. $41 and change. No living relatives, none she could call on. The job she'd left in Pennsylvania was already given to someone else. The room she'd rented there was already let. She had known when she boarded the train that she was burning a bridge behind her, but she'd believed there was solid ground on the other side. Harold's property would go to— She didn't know. Creditors, maybe. The county. She didn't even know if he'd had a will. She didn't know anything about his life out here except what he'd written in a letter, 8 months old. $41. In Silver Ridge, Colorado, in February. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the hotel. Tip. The hotel room cost $2 a night, which was highway robbery for what she got. A narrow bed with a mattress that felt like it was stuffed with gravel, a window that didn't quite close, and a washstand with a pitcher of water that was already cold. Clara sat on the edge of the bed for exactly as long as it took her to understand the full scope of what she was facing, and then she stood up and went downstairs to ask about work. The hotel owner was a woman named Mrs. Hartwell, somewhere in her 50s, with the particular efficiency of a person who had been running something alone for a long time. She had silver hair pulled back hard, and eyes that moved over Clara the way a butcher's eyes move over a cut of meat. Not unkind, just practical. "What kind of work can you do?" Mrs. Hartwell asked. "Cleaning, cooking, laundry. I've done accounts work too. I kept books for a hardware store back east for 3 years. Can you lift?" "Yes." "Can you take instruction without arguing?" Clara almost smiled at that. "When the instruction is reasonable." Mrs. Hartwell looked at her for a long moment. "I've got a girl who does the rooms already. I don't need another." She paused. "But Margaret Doyle runs the laundry 2 blocks east, and she's been short-handed since her daughter married and left. You go tell her Eleanor Hartwell sent you. She won't throw you out." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Hartwell said, and went back to her ledger. Margaret Doyle's laundry was a steaming, low-ceilinged building that smelled of lye and wet wool and hard work. It was also, Clara would come to understand, the closest thing Silver Ridge had to a newspaper, because every piece of gossip the town produced eventually made its way through Margaret's doors, along with the dirty linens. Margaret herself was a small Irish woman with red hands and a voice that carried like a train whistle, and she looked at Clara the way most of the town looked at her, as a problem of uncertain origin. "Eleanor sent you?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're the one whose uncle died?" "Yes." Margaret picked up a sheet and shook it out hard enough to crack the air. "You done laundry work before?" "At home. Not commercially. It's harder than it looks." "Most things are." Something in that answer seemed to satisfy Margaret, or at least fail to dissatisfy her. She told Clara to come back the next morning at 6, and sent her out the door without another word. Clara stood in the cold outside the laundry with $40 in change and the beginning of something that was not quite hope, more like the absence of surrender. It wasn't much to build on, but it was what she had. She had been at the hotel 4 days when she met Eli Ryder. She was sitting on the small porch outside the hotel in the late afternoon, the only hour of daylight she had that wasn't spoken for, trying to write a letter to an old friend back in Pennsylvania that she couldn't quite figure out how to start. The honest version began. "I have made a terrible mistake, and I don't know what to do," and she wasn't ready to put that on paper yet. The boy appeared at the foot of the porch steps with a directness that Clara would later recognize as deeply characteristic of him. No preamble, no apparent awareness that walking up to strangers and starting conversations might require some social negotiation. He was maybe 8 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a serious expression that looked like it had been borrowed from someone much older. He was carrying a paper bag that smelled like something from the general store. "You're the lady whose uncle died," he said. Clara looked up from her letter. "That seems to be how people know me around here. My pa said we shouldn't bother you because you've had a hard time." He didn't look remotely like a person who had decided to follow that advice. "Your pa sounds like a considerate man." "He is. He also said you were probably lonely, but I wasn't supposed to say that part." Clara set down her pen. "What's your name?" "Eli Ryder. My pa is Caleb Ryder. We have a ranch out east of town." He said it the way children announce facts, plainly, without apparent expectation of response. "I'm Clara Bennett." "I know, Mrs. Hartwell told us." He shifted the paper bag from one arm to the other. "Do you like ginger snaps? My pa bought some at the store and there's too many." Clara looked at this bag and then at Eli and understood in the uncomplicated way that children sometimes accidentally make things clear that this was not a surplus of ginger snaps situation. This was a small boy who had been told not to bother the lonely woman and had decided that technically offering cookies wasn't bothering. "I do like ginger snaps," she said carefully, "though I don't want to take what belongs to your family." Pa said it was all right. He was already opening the bag. "He said if you didn't want them, to just say no and come back. But he didn't say I couldn't offer." She took a cookie. It was good, the kind with real ginger in it, which meant someone knew what they were doing. "Thank you, Eli." He sat down on the step without being invited, which Clara found she didn't mind. "Are you going to stay in Silver Ridge?" "For a while." "Where will you go after?" "I don't know yet." He thought about this with the gravity of someone considering a serious question. Pa says it's hard when you don't have a plan. He didn't have a plan for a long time after our mama died. Clara was quiet for a moment. How long ago was that? 2 years. He said it the way children sometimes say painful things, directly, because they haven't yet learned the adult skill of managing distance from grief. It was bad for a while. Pa didn't talk much. My sister cried a lot. But it got better. He looked at her steadily. Things usually do, I think. I think so too, Clara said. She wasn't sure she believed it right then, but she appreciated that he said it. She didn't meet Caleb Ryder until the following week. She had put in 6 days at the laundry by then, and her hands were already starting to show it, red and raw from the lye, with a small burn on her left wrist from the mangle that she'd had to bandage herself because the hydrogen peroxide in her kit was running low, and she didn't want to spend money at the apothecary. The work was physical in a way her previous jobs hadn't been, demanding in the specific way that laundry demands, constant, repetitive, hard on the back and the arms, requiring a kind of stamina that was different from any other kind. She was good at it, which surprised her. She had not known she was good at repetitive physical labor. She had worked in offices and homes, managing other people's things, and she had been competent at all of it. But there was something about the rhythm of the laundry that her body took to without complaint. Lift and wring and hang and lift again. The steam that made her hair escape from its pins, the smell of clean things. Margaret had said, on the third day, "You'll do," which for Margaret was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. She was walking back to the hotel on a Tuesday afternoon with her arms aching and her hair damp when she nearly walked into a man coming out of the feed store. She stepped back. He stepped back. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the particular kind of face that spends a lot of time outdoors, weathered but not hardened, with lines around the eyes that could have been from squinting into sun or from years of difficult feelings, probably both. He had dark hair like Eli's, and he was carrying 2 heavy feed sacks, one under each arm, and he managed the near collision without dropping either of them, which Clara noted as a mark in his favor. "Sorry," he said. "I wasn't watching." "Neither was I." She steadied herself. "You're Caleb Ryder." Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise. More like the recognition of someone who already knows their own reputation in a small town. "Eli found you. He brought cookies." Caleb Ryder looked briefly upward, the expression of a parent who has given simple instructions and received complicated results. "I told him not to bother you." "He didn't bother me." She met his eyes directly. "He was kind. You should know he's very good at it, even when someone tells him to stay home." He looked at her for a moment in a way that was neither intrusive nor dismissive, just attention, the kind that felt like it was actually listening. "Are you settling in all right?" "I've started work at Mrs. Doyle's laundry." Margaret's a fair woman. "She is." Clara adjusted the strap of her bag. "I want to thank you for the cookies, Mr. Ryder, though I suspect the surplus was a fiction." He didn't deny it. He also didn't look embarrassed about it, which she found she respected. "Eli was worried about you," he said. "He worries about people." "He mentioned your wife." She hadn't meant to say it quite so directly. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. It's none of my—" "It's all right." His voice was even. Not the flatness of someone shutting a door, more the evenness of someone who has learned to carry something without dropping it. "He talks about her. That's a good thing." "It is," Clara said. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just the pause of 2 strangers who have unexpectedly gotten closer to a real conversation than either of them intended. The wind moved down the street and Clara pulled her coat tighter. "If you need anything," Caleb said, "the ranch is east of town, about 4 miles out. Anyone can point you." He said it the way people say things they mean plainly, without performance. "I'm not saying you need help. I'm saying the offer stands." "I appreciate that," Clara said. He nodded, shifted the feed sacks, and walked on. She stood on the sidewalk and watched him go, not because she was particularly struck by him. She wasn't, or she told herself she wasn't, but because there was something in the straightforwardness of the exchange that she hadn't expected. In her experience, kindness toward women alone and in difficulty usually came with either condescension or an agenda. His had come with neither. It had just been what it appeared to be. She filed that away as a curiosity and walked back to the hotel. The first month was the hardest. Not because of the cold, though the cold was relentless, the kind that Silver Ridge wore like a permanent condition, with winds that found every gap in her hotel room window and made the nights a test of endurance. Not because of the work. The laundry work was exhausting but manageable, and Margaret had started paying her slightly more than the starting wage after her second week, which was Margaret's way of approving of her without saying so out loud. Not even because of the loneliness, which was real, but which Clara had experience with. She had been lonely at various points in her life, and she had learned that it was a condition you could function around. The hardest thing was the smallness of her world. $2 a night for the hotel room, $6 a week from the laundry. She was running the mathematics constantly. What she spent, what she saved, how long before she could afford something more permanent, how much a rented room somewhere would cost versus the hotel. She ate simply and carefully. She mended her own clothes and resoled one pair of shoes herself, badly, but it held. She wrote letters she sometimes sent and sometimes didn't. One morning in her third week, she slipped on ice outside the laundry, just her feet going out from under her in the specific, undignified way ice manages. And she went down hard on her hip and her wrist and sat there on the frozen ground for a moment before she could decide whether to laugh or cry. She chose neither and got up. But for that one moment, sitting in the cold with pain shooting up her arm and her dignity somewhere in the gutter, she had thought, Harold, I could have used that room. She did not say this to anyone. But the next day, Eli appeared at the laundry door at closing time with a jar of his grandmother's salve for her wrist, because someone in this town talked to someone else about everything, and Eli Ryder apparently had a small-town intelligence network that would have impressed a general. Pa said you might not want it, he said, holding out the jar. But I said you probably weren't too proud for medicine. Clara took the jar. Your pa's right that I might not want it. You're right that I'll use it. Eli seemed satisfied with this distinction. Are you coming to the harvest social? He asked, as if this were the natural continuation of the conversation. What harvest social? It's not for a few weeks, but people sign up early. He looked at her with those two old eyes. You should come. It's at the church hall. There's dancing. I haven't been invited. I'm inviting you. He said it with perfect seriousness. Pa would come with us. He doesn't dance anymore, but he doesn't stop other people from it. Clara unscrewed the lid of the jar and smelled it. Something mentholated and medicinal, the kind of thing that actually worked. I'll think about it, she said. That means yes when Pa says it, Eli told her. Does it mean yes when you say it? It means I'll think about it, Clara said. But she was smiling when she walked home. The second time Clara spoke to Caleb at any length was not a chance encounter. It was deliberate on her part, which surprised her when she admitted it to herself later. She had heard, through Margaret's laundry, which was the nerve center of Silver Ridge's informational universe, that the Ryder Ranch was struggling. Not failing, not yet, but carrying the particular weight of a place that had been running on reduced capacity for 2 years. A man alone with 2 children and a cattle operation needed hands, and good hands were expensive, and the previous winter had been bad. She hadn't meant to use that information for anything. It was simply information. But on a Wednesday afternoon when she had finished her work early because Margaret's assistant had actually shown up for once, she found herself walking east out of town along a road that one of Margaret's regulars had told her, entirely unprompted, led to the Ryder property. She told herself she was just walking. The air was clearer east of town. Caleb was in the yard when she arrived, working on a fence line that ran along the near pasture, and doing it in the economical way of someone who has fixed the same fence many times and knows every step of it. He saw her coming from a distance and didn't look startled, which Clara appreciated. She had found that men who were startled by women approaching them usually had complicated reasons for that. Miss Bennet, he said, not unwelcoming, just noting. Mr. Ryder. She stopped at the fence. I heard you might be looking for help. With the accounts, maybe. Or whatever else needs doing. She felt the awkwardness of it as soon as she said it. She hadn't planned this speech well, and it showed. I kept books before, and I'm not looking for charity. I'd want to be paid, even if it's small, for real work. He set down the pliers he was holding and looked at her. Who told you I needed accounts help? Mrs. Doyle's laundry is an excellent source of information. Something shifted in his face, not quite amusement, but in that neighborhood. Margaret should charge extra for the gossip. Probably. Clara held his gaze. I'm not here to put you in a difficult position, Mr. Ryder. If the offer doesn't work, I'll go back. But I'm good with numbers, and I learn fast, and I'm not interested in pretending I'm doing all right just so you don't feel you're helping me. I need work. You might need help. That's all." He looked at her for a long moment, not assessing the way Mrs. Hartwell had assessed her, not the practical measurement of what she could carry, more like the look of someone deciding whether to trust the thing in front of them. 3 hours a week, he said finally. On Saturdays. The accounts are a mess because I hate them, and I've been putting off the tax filing since November. He named a figure that was modest but fair. If it works, we can talk about more. All right, she said. You'll have to come out here. I've got the books in the house. I understood that. He picked the pliers back up. I'll see you Saturday then, Miss Bennett. She walked back to town with the wind at her back, and the arithmetic had shifted slightly in her favor, and she did not let herself make anything more out of that than what it was. The ranch house was lived in all the ways that mattered and neglected in the ways that happened when a person was keeping too many things alive at once. Clara noticed both without commenting on either. There was the good structure of a home that had been well made originally, good solid furniture, walls that had been painted with care, a kitchen that had clearly once been someone's domain. And then there was the overlaying of 2 years of people doing their best in the absence of that someone, which meant things that weren't quite clean, corners that had been given up on, the small organizational chaos of a household run by a grieving man and 2 children. The children were both there the first Saturday. Eli she knew. He showed her in with the proprietary air of someone who has been expecting a guest and is pleased with himself for predicting their arrival correctly. The girl, Caleb's daughter, Anna, was older than Eli by 2 or 3 years, maybe 11 or 12, and she had her father's eyes and a wariness around them that made Clara careful. Anna sat at the kitchen table doing her schoolwork and looked at Clara with the measured suspicion of a child who has decided to see what a person does before deciding how to feel about them. Clara respected that. She didn't make conversation with Anna. She didn't make an effort to win her over. She just asked Caleb where the books were and sat down and went to work. The books were, in fact, a mess. Not incompetent. She could see that Caleb understood what he was tracking, but they were behind and inconsistent in their formatting and flagging at least 2 areas where the ranch might have a filing problem come spring. Clara had the tax issue identified and a workable solution sketched out within an hour and a half, and she left Caleb with a list of things to find and questions to answer before next Saturday. She was putting on her coat to leave when Anna said, without looking up from her school book, "Can you do arithmetic?" Clara stopped. "I can. I have a problem I can't figure out." Anna said it with effort, as if she had been deciding whether to say it all morning. "It's for school." "Show me," Clara said. She sat back down at the table, not across from Anna, not beside her. At the end, the neutral angle. She looked at the problem, which was a long division question that had taken a wrong turn about halfway through. She didn't solve it for Anna. She pointed at the step where it had gone sideways and asked what Anna had been thinking when she made that choice. Anna answered, realized the error herself in the act of explaining it, and reworked the problem without help. It took 4 minutes. "Thank you," Anna said. She looked at Clara with the calculating evaluation of a child who has just had the thing she expected not to get. "You didn't just do it." "You didn't need me to," Clara said. She put her coat on and left. But she could feel, not smugly, just factually, that something had changed slightly in that kitchen, the degree of tilt on a set of scales that had been watching her since she walked in the door. Outside, Caleb was hitching a horse. "You're good with numbers," he said. "She didn't ask me for help with that problem, and I knew about it for 3 days." "She needed to solve it herself," Clara said. "She's smart. She just needed to hear herself think." He looked at her for a moment in the way she was beginning to recognize, the long, careful attention. "Same time next Saturday?" "Same time next Saturday," she said. She walked back to town as the late afternoon light came off the mountains in long gold sheets, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that stage into the mud, the $41 didn't feel like the whole of what she had left. She wasn't sure what had changed exactly. She wasn't sure she wanted to look at it too closely. She just walked, and the road was hard under her boots, and Silver Ridge waited at the end of it like something she was beginning, slowly and against her better judgment, to call familiar. The Saturdays became the structure around which the rest of Clara's week quietly organized itself. She didn't notice it happening at first. She was too busy with the laundry. Winter was the busy season, Margaret told her, because people were indoors more and making more mess and less inclined to deal with it themselves. The work had expanded into something that required Clara's full physical attention from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, and by the time she walked back to the hotel each day, her back ached in a line straight across her shoulder blades, and her hands had taken on a permanent faint redness that no amount of salve entirely fixed. But Saturday morning, she would wake up without the alarm in her body that the weekday work produced. She would eat her breakfast in the hotel dining room with more appetite than usual, and she would walk the 4 miles east of town to the Ryder Ranch in whatever the weather offered, which in February could be almost anything, and she would sit down with the ranch accounts and work through them with the particular satisfaction of someone who is good at the thing they are doing. The accounts were getting better. That was genuinely satisfying. Caleb had found the papers she'd asked for, answered her questions, and in doing so had given her a fuller picture of the ranch's financial situation, which was tighter than it should have been, but not, she now believed, unworkable. There were 2 areas of unnecessary spending she had already identified, and one area where she suspected the ranch had been undercharging for its cattle by following a middleman's suggested price rather than tracking the actual market. She was building a case for that last point. She liked building cases. What she had not expected was how much of those Saturdays she spent not working on the accounts at all. It started with Anna's arithmetic. That had been unremarkable enough. One problem, solved together, done. But the following Saturday, Anna had 2 problems. The Saturday after that, she had a full set of homework that her teacher had apparently praised, and she told Clara this without exactly saying she was proud of it, which meant she was very proud of it, and wasn't sure she was allowed to be yet. And Eli simply never left. He moved through the house and around their work table with the easy assumption that he was welcome everywhere, which, Clara gathered, he was. He asked questions about what Clara was writing down. He brought her things, a cup of coffee, once a piece of pie that he said was left over from dinner but was probably not left over from dinner. He talked. Eli was a remarkable talker for a quiet-seeming child, and what he talked about was mostly the ranch, the animals, his sister, his teacher at school, and with the careful circling of someone who has been told something is private, his father. Pa fixed the south fence today, he might say. Or, Pa didn't sleep well last night, but he won't say so. Or, in the particular way children let important things drop accidentally. Pa said the cattle price was better last month. He smiled at breakfast. He doesn't do that as much as he used to. Clara listened to all of it and did not make the mistake of commenting on the parts that were private. But she was building a picture, the same way she built pictures from accounts, not from any single entry, but from the pattern of them, from what went up and what went down and what had been quietly neglected. Caleb himself was present but not intrusive on those mornings. He worked. There was always something to work on, and he was the kind of man who moved from one task to the next without drama, without needing to announce the effort. But he would come inside for coffee, and he would check on what Clara was doing with the natural interest of a man whose book she was managing, and sometimes those check-ins lasted longer than they needed to. One Saturday in March, she showed him the cattle pricing issue. She had laid it out on paper, the middleman's suggested prices over the past 18 months against the actual market rates she'd tracked through the feed store's order sheets, which were, she had discovered, a remarkable secondary source of market intelligence. The difference was not enormous, but it was consistent, and consistent small losses added up. Caleb sat down across from her and looked at the numbers for a long time. He told me this was standard, he said finally. He was Gerald Thorne, who brokered cattle sales for most of the ranchers in the county. He's been doing it for 10 years. He's been doing it for 10 years, Clara said carefully, and the margin favors him consistently. That could be coincidence. Caleb looked at her. It could be, she said again, and did not say what else it could be. He sat with it. She could see him working through the implications, not just the financial ones, but the social ones, because Gerald Thorne was also a man of some standing in Silver Ridge, and the town had a particular attitude toward accusations against men of standing. Clara had already noticed this. What would you do? He asked. Track the next sale myself. Get the numbers before he gives you his suggested price. Compare them when you have both. She met his eyes. If I'm wrong, nothing changes. If I'm right, you have something solid. He was quiet for a moment. You're careful, he said. Not a question. I found it pays better than being reckless. He almost smiled at that. Not quite, but the lines around his eyes shifted in a way that meant something was happening in that direction. All right, he said, the next sale is in 6 weeks. You'll have the number beforehand? I'll have it in 2. He nodded and pushed back from the table. At the door, he paused. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her name without the miss. She noticed it and kept her face still. I appreciate it. Not just the work, all of it. She didn't tell him it was nothing, because it wasn't nothing, and she had a strong aversion to false modesty. I know, she said. He went back outside. Across the table, Eli looked up from the drawing he'd been doing and said, with perfect innocence, Pa never says that to anyone. Go back to your drawing, Eli, Clara said. Bottom. Spring arrived in Silver Ridge in the way it always does in high country. Not gradually, but in argument. A warm week, then a late freeze that killed things that had been too optimistic. Then warmth again, and the mud season that made every road in the county a personal enemy. Clara had been in Silver Ridge for 2 months, and she had moved out of the hotel. The room was above the tailor's shop on the main street, small, cold in the mornings, with a window that looked out on the roof of the adjacent building and a ceiling that sloped on one side in a way that required her to remember it. But it cost 40 cents a night, which was 60% less than the hotel, and it had a small stove, and it was hers in a way the hotel room never had been. She had a shelf for her books and a nail on the wall for her coat and a window she could actually open. She had $73 saved. This was remarkable to her in a way she didn't allow to become sentimental. She had arrived with $41 and the prospect of nothing, and she had now, through 2 months of hard work and careful spending, more than she'd started with. The math of survival had not beaten her. That mattered. She did not take it for granted. What she was less certain about was the other math, the less quantifiable kind, that seemed to be running its own ledger somewhere she didn't have full access to. Margaret noticed first, which was perhaps inevitable. Margaret noticed everything. You're different on Sundays, Margaret said one morning, sorting the week's incoming. She said it the way she said most things, without preamble or apology. Different how, Clara said, which was not quite the denial she'd intended. Less wound up. Margaret held a sheet to the light and examined it. You spend Saturdays out at the Ryder place. I do the accounts. Margaret's was a full sentence with paragraphs in it. Caleb Ryder is a decent man. He's a good employer, Clara said precisely. Is that all he is? Margaret. I'm just talking, Margaret said, which was the most transparent lie in the English language. She put the sheet down and looked at Clara directly in a way she rarely did. He's been alone 2 years. People in this town have been trying to fix that for 18 months, and he won't have it. He doesn't come to the socials. He doesn't accept dinner invitations. He minds his ranch and his children and nothing else. She paused. He came into town twice last week, both on days you were in town. Clara said nothing. I'm not saying anything, Margaret said. I'm just noting. You're saying quite a lot for someone who's not saying anything, Clara said. Margaret smiled, which she rarely did, and went back to the sorting. Clara did not let herself think about it on the walk home. She had a specific, practiced ability to redirect her thinking away from things that had too many variables and not enough data, and she deployed it now. She thought about the cattle sale instead, which was 2 weeks away, and the numbers she would have ready for it. But she slept less well that night than she usually did, and she knew what she was not thinking about. The cattle sale numbers bore Clara out exactly. She had the market figure from 2 weeks of quiet inquiry. The feed store, a conversation with a rancher whose wife brought laundry in, one letter to a contact in Denver who knew the industry. When Gerald Thorne came to Caleb 5 days before the sale with his suggested price, it was, as Clara's research had predicted, 8% below the actual market rate. She laid it out on the kitchen table on a Thursday evening. Caleb had asked her to come by specifically for this, which was outside her Saturday arrangement, and she had come without making anything of the departure from the arrangement. He looked at the numbers for a long time, longer than the mathematics required. 8%, he said, consistently, 18 months. That's not an accident. No, Clara said. Caleb sat back in the kitchen chair. It creaked under him. It always creaked. She had noticed it every Saturday, one of 100 small things in this house that needed attention and waited behind more urgent things. What do I do with it? He asked. Not rhetorically, he was genuinely asking her. That depends on what you want. She kept her voice even. You could go directly to the buyer without Thorne. You have the right to. He's not under contract with you. He just always handled it and you let him. If you cut him out of one sale, it'll be noticed. He'll be angry. He'll be angry, Clara agreed. He has friends in this town. He does. Caleb looked at the table. But the numbers are real. The numbers are real, she said. They're documented. If anyone questions them, the documentation is there. He was quiet for a moment. Anna had come into the kitchen for water and had stopped just inside the doorway, reading the room the way she always did before she committed to entering it. Caleb glanced at her. Go to bed, sweetheart. Anna went. Not quickly enough that she didn't catch Clara's eye on her way out, and what was in her look was not exactly a 12-year-old's expression. It was something older and more complicated, the look of a girl who had been watching the adults in her life with considerable care and was filing things away. I'll do it, Caleb said. I'll contact Hargroves directly. Hargroves was the main buying house in the county. Can you draft the letter? Now? If you have the time. She drafted it at the kitchen table in 20 minutes. It was a simple letter, professional, direct, nothing that could be read as accusatory if Thorne ever saw it. She handed it to Caleb. He read it once, set it down, and said, You're good at this. You said that about the accounts. I mean the whole of it. You see the thing clearly, and then you find the straight line to it without making more of a mess than necessary. He looked at her with the particular directness he had, the quality of someone who has learned not to waste time on indirection. Where did you learn to think like this? Necessity, Clara said. Mostly. That's a real answer. It's the real answer. She folded the letter into an envelope. I didn't have anyone to fix things for me, so I learned to fix them. Something moved in his face. Not pity, which she would have hated, but something that was more like recognition, as if she had described something he also knew. Caleb, she said, and it was deliberate, the use of his name without the formality. The sale next week. It'll be all right. The numbers are solid and the documentation is there. Thorne may make noise, but he can't argue with what's written down. I know, he said. She put her coat on and picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped because the evening had turned genuinely cold, and she was steeling herself for it. And he said from behind her, You don't have to walk. I can bring the wagon around. It's 4 miles. I know how far it is. She turned to look at him. He was still at the table, and the kitchen light was behind him, and there was something in the plain domesticity of the moment, the lamp, the letter on the table, the creaking chair, that she needed to look at clearly and not mistake for anything it wasn't. I walk it every Saturday, she said. I know the road. He didn't push it, but he stood up when she left, which she noticed, and she heard the door behind her before she was fully off the porch, which meant he'd watched until she was in the dark. She walked 4 miles in the cold and did the arithmetic on things that didn't have numbers, and found she couldn't balance the ledger no matter how she arranged it. Gerald Thorne came to the laundry. He came on a Wednesday, which was the middle of the week and Margaret's busiest day, when the steam was high and the noise was such that conversations had to be conducted at some volume to be heard. He was a broad man in his mid-50s, well-dressed in the way of someone who wants people to notice the quality of the fabric, with the kind of face that might have been handsome once and had settled into an authority that he clearly found satisfactory. He did not bring laundry. He stood at the counter and asked for Clara Bennett, and Margaret appeared from the back with the expression of someone who has been listening since he came through the door and has already formed several opinions. She's working, Margaret said. I just need a moment. Margaret looked at him for a long time with absolutely no warmth, and then called Clara in. Clara came from the back drying her hands on her apron, and she understood immediately from the way Margaret was standing, slightly between her and the counter, that this was not a routine situation. Miss Bennett, Thorne said. He had a voice calibrated for public spaces, full and rounded, the kind that expected to be well received. I understand you've been helping Caleb Ryder with his accounts. That's between myself and Mr. Ryder, Clara said pleasantly. Of course. He put his hands on the counter, a gesture that was supposed to read as casual and read instead as ownership. I only wanted to say that I've handled Ryder's cattle business for a long time, and I think there may have been some confusion about the figures for the upcoming sale. If you've been looking at numbers from an outside source, they might not reflect the full picture. He smiled. I'd be happy to sit down with both of you and explain how the pricing actually works. Clara kept her face still and her voice easy. That's very kind of you, Mr. Thorne. I'll pass that on to Mr. Ryder. I think it would clear up any misunderstanding. I'm sure it would, she said. He looked at her for a moment, not long enough to be a threat, just long enough to be a statement. Then he nodded pleasantly to Margaret, who did not nod back, and left. Margaret came to stand beside Clara, and they both watched him go. He heard, Margaret said. He heard, Clara agreed. Are the numbers right? Yes. Then don't let him rattle you. Clara had not been rattled, but she had noted the visit, the tone, the careful framing of everything as confusion and misunderstanding. The language of a man who has learned to manage threats by redefining them before they can be stated clearly. She had met men like that before. She found she was not afraid of them, but she was careful of them, which was a different and more useful thing. She sent a note to Caleb that evening, describing the conversation in plain terms, without dramatizing it. He knows you're not going through him. He came to tell me so. The documentation is clean. Proceed as planned. Caleb's reply came the next morning through Eli, who arrived at the laundry door before it was fully open with a note that said, Understood. Thank you for telling me. Don't let him near the books. At the bottom, in different handwriting, Anna's, she thought, more careful and deliberate. Thank you for the arithmetic help last Saturday. Clara folded the note and put it in her coat pocket and went to work. The cattle sale went exactly as the numbers had predicted. Hargroves paid the market rate, which was the rate Clara had documented. The difference from what Thorne would have brought Caleb amounted to $63, more than enough to repair the south pasture fence, which Eli had been telling her about in increments for 2 months, and put something toward the spring operating costs that had been quietly worrying Caleb since February. Caleb came to find her at the laundry the day after the sale, not on a Saturday, just on a Friday afternoon, standing at the counter, looking like a man who had not quite figured out how to say what he came to say. $63, he said when she came to the counter. I know. You knew it would be approximately that. The math wasn't complicated once the data was right. He put his hands on the counter, not like Thorne had, not that ownership-claiming gesture, but the restless movement of a person who has energy they don't know what to do with. Thorne talked to me yesterday, he said. Clara waited. He told me you'd been giving me inaccurate figures, told me I should have let him handle it. His jaw had a particular set to it. He said you might not understand how the market works out here. What did you say? I told him I'd seen the documentation. He met her eyes. I told him we wouldn't be needing his services going forward. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. How did he take that? Clara said. How do you think? Not a question. She exhaled slowly. He'll make things difficult. He'll try. Caleb's voice was flat. Not frightened, just factual. I've been letting people manage things for me because I was too tired to do it myself. My wife died and I stopped paying attention to things I should have been watching. He looked at the counter. That's on me, not on Thorne. He still chose to take advantage of it, Clara said. He did. Caleb raised his eyes to hers. I won't forget that you're the one who saw it. Clara said nothing, because what she might have said would have been too much. Eli asks about you every day, he said, moving to safer ground with the instinct of a man who has felt himself approaching something he isn't ready for. Anna pretends she doesn't, but she does. They're good children, Clara said. You've done well with them. I've kept them alive, he said, and it was so plainly said, so without any search for credit, that it made her chest ache a little. Their mother would have done better. Maybe, Clara said. But you're here and you're trying, and they know the difference between those two things and nothing. He looked at her. She shouldn't have said that. It was too much of what she was actually thinking. She went to straighten the counter unnecessarily, putting her hands to work because they were useful things to occupy. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she said. Well, she had been in Silver Ridge for 3 months when Martin Hollis walked into Margaret's laundry on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Thursday, the entire town knew that he had taken notice of Clara Bennett. Martin Hollis was something Silver Ridge took quiet pride in, the way small towns take pride in their most successful exports. He had grown up here, made money in Denver, land acquisition, people said, sometimes with admiration and sometimes with the particular flatness that meant they weren't entirely sure how the money had been made, and had returned to Silver Ridge 2 years ago to build a fine house on the west edge of town and call himself a man of standing. He was 45, well-dressed, not unhandsome, and widowed, and the town had been waiting with patient, collective hopefulness for him to settle on someone appropriate. He came in with shirts to launder and stayed 12 minutes after Margaret could have told him the shirts were ready because he was talking to Clara. Clara noticed Margaret noticing this from the back and found she couldn't decide whether to be amused or alarmed, and settled on watchful. Hollis was polished in a way that Caleb was not. Easy in conversation, quick with a compliment that was just thoughtful enough not to be empty, the kind of man who had practiced being well-liked and largely succeeded. He asked about her work. He asked about Pennsylvania. He said Silver Ridge must seem very different from what she was used to, which was both accurate and slightly condescending in a way she chose not to call out. "It's been a good town," she said, which was both honest and uncommitting. "You're at the Ryder Ranch on Saturdays," he said. The transition was smooth. She noticed it was smooth. "I do accounts work there." "Caleb's a hard worker," Hollis said, in the tone of a man giving praise to someone he does not consider a rival. "Good man. Rough time these past years." He picked up his shirts. "I hope he's treating you fairly." "He is," Clara said. "Good." He held her gaze a moment longer than was strictly required. "I'm having a small dinner Friday evening. A few people from town. Nothing formal." He named the people: the judge, the doctor, 2 respected merchants, and their wives. People who were the architecture of the town's social order. "I'd like you to come if you're willing. It's time Silver Ridge knew you properly." Clara looked at him steadily. He was offering her something real. She understood that. An introduction to the people who ran this town, at a table where she would be presented as a person worth knowing. In a small frontier community, that was not a small thing. "Thank you," she said. "I'll consider it." He nodded, and the smile he gave her as he left was the smile of a man who did not frequently need to wait for an answer and expected to be told yes. After he was gone, Margaret came from the back and said nothing for approximately 4 seconds, which was a remarkable exercise of restraint for Margaret. "He's interested," she said. "I noticed," Clara said. "He's the most comfortable situation in Silver Ridge for a woman alone." "I noticed that too." "But," Margaret said, because she was Margaret, and she could hear the shape of an unspoken word. Clara picked up the next order and didn't answer for a moment. "There are different kinds of comfortable," she said finally. Margaret looked at her with the patient, particular expression of a woman who has seen a lot of choices made and knows which ones tend to hold. "Don't be too smart for your own good, girl," she said, not unkindly. Clara went to the dinner on Friday. She wore her best dress, the green one she'd brought from Pennsylvania and hadn't yet worn in Silver Ridge, and she sat at Hollis's table and was introduced to the judge and the doctor and the merchants and their wives. And she was interesting and warm and appropriately modest about herself, and she could feel Hollis watching her in the particular way that meant he was calculating a future. She drove home alone in the cold and sat on the edge of her narrow bed and did the arithmetic she'd been avoiding. Martin Hollis was offering her something solid, a real position in this town. The kind of security that a woman who had arrived with $41 in a dead man's town did not easily come by. She was not stupid enough to dismiss it as beneath her consideration. But she kept thinking about a kitchen table and the sound of a chair that needed fixing, and a man who said, "I've kept them alive with no search for credit at all." And she was afraid, not of Hollis, not of the dinner table, not of any of the things that were supposed to frighten her, but of the specific, quiet terror of mistaking one feeling for another, of choosing a thing because it was available rather than because it was right. She did not sleep well that night. She did not sleep well the night after either. But Saturday came, as it always did, and she walked the 4 miles east out of town in the early morning light with her boots on the hard road, and the mountains were clear against the sky in every direction, and Silver Ridge fell behind her with each step. She arrived at the ranch to find Eli already at the gate, waiting, in the way that suggested he had possibly been watching the road for some time. He fell into step beside her without preamble. "Pa made coffee," he said. "Good," she said. "Anna finished her fractions. She wants to show you." "Good." "Mr. Hollis had a dinner party," Eli said, with the particular lateral approach that meant he was coming at something he'd been told. "Were you there?" Clara looked down at him. "Who told you that?" Mrs. Hartwell told Mrs. Doyle's girl, and she told the Jenkins boy, and he told me at school. He paused. Pa didn't ask, but I think he wanted to. Clara said, "Go tell your father I'm here, Eli." "He knows," Eli said. "He's been watching from the window since you came around the bend." She stopped walking. Eli looked up at her with the expression of a boy who has said an honest thing and is waiting to see what an adult does with it. Clara looked at the house, the familiar outline of it, the smoke from the kitchen stove, the south fence that was new wood where Caleb had repaired it with the $63, the garden on the east side that had been someone's once and had gone to nothing. "Go inside, Eli," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and ran. She stood there for a moment in the morning air before she followed, feeling something she did not have a clean word for, something that was part fear and part recognition and part the particular ache of a person who has been careful for a long time and is beginning to understand why. She went inside. The door was unlocked, as it always was. The coffee was on the table when she came in, and Caleb was at the stove with his back to her, doing something to the cast iron pan that didn't strictly require his full attention, but was receiving it anyway. This was, she had come to understand, how he managed the moments between things. He found a task and put his hands to it and waited for the world to settle into whatever it was going to be. "Morning," he said, without turning. "Morning," she said, and hung her coat on the hook by the door. Anna was at the table with her fractions spread out in front of her, and she looked up with an expression calibrated very precisely to indicate that she had simply happened to be sitting there and had not been waiting. Clara sat down across from her and pulled the papers closer and looked at the work, which was clean and correct all the way through. "You did these yourself," Clara said. "Yes." A pause. "I got stuck on the last one for a while." "But you didn't quit." "No." Anna said it simply, the way children say things that are true without knowing they're also something to be proud of. Caleb set a cup of coffee in front of Clara and went back to the stove, and the kitchen had its Saturday morning quality, the particular warmth of a room that was being lived in rather than maintained, with Eli's boots by the door and a coat of Anna's over the back of a chair and the smell of something that had been baking. It was the kind of morning, Clara thought, that did not announce itself. It simply was. She worked through the accounts while the children moved in and out, and Caleb came and went from the yard. And she did not think about Martin Hollis or Friday's dinner table or the arithmetic she'd been running all week. She thought about the numbers in front of her, which had a clean logic that she trusted, and she let that be enough for the morning. It was almost noon when Caleb came back inside and poured himself coffee and sat down at the other end of the table, not across from her, just in the room. Present. He'd been mending harness, she could see it on his hands, and he'd washed them at the pump outside but hadn't gotten all of it. "Hollis's dinner," he said, without preamble. Not looking at her, looking at his cup. Clara set her pen down. "Eli told me you were there," he said. "I'm not asking about it, I just wanted you to know I know, so it wasn't—" He stopped, tried again. "So it wasn't a thing we were pretending around." "It was a dinner," Clara said. "He invited some people from town. I went." "He's interested in you," still looking at the cup. "He may be." Now he looked up. His eyes had that quality she'd noticed from the beginning, directness without aggression, the look of a person who has decided that honesty is cheaper than its alternative. "Is that something you're considering?" The kitchen was quiet. From outside she could hear Eli doing something with the chickens, the small, ordinary noise of the yard. "I don't know yet," she said, and because she owed him honesty in return, "He's offering something real, Caleb. I came to this town with $41. I'm not in a position to dismiss a solid future because it's tidy." He absorbed this without flinching, which she respected. "Tidy," he said. "You know what I mean." "I think I do." He turned the cup in his hands. "Hollis is a good fit on paper. He's established. He's comfortable. He'd take care of you in the ways that are visible." A pause. "I just want you to know that you have options that aren't either him or the laundry." She waited. He looked up again. "The accounts are one thing, but I've been watching what you do here on Saturdays with this house and with my kids, and it's—" He stopped again. This was clearly a man who had words in him, but had spent 2 years not using them, and they were coming out with the rust of long disuse. "I'm not asking you to make any decision. I just didn't want you to make one without knowing." Knowing what? Clara said, because she needed him to say it. He met her eyes. That this house is different since you started coming. That Anna does her homework without being asked. That Eli talks about you every single day like you hung the stars, which is... The corner of his mouth moved. A lot of pressure on a person, probably. And that I notice when Saturday comes and I notice worse when it goes. He set the cup down. That's what I wanted you to know. Clara did not say anything for a long moment. She thought about the careful arithmetic she had been doing all week, the columns she'd been trying to balance. Security against uncertainty, comfort against something that had no clean name. She thought about the way she'd sat on the edge of her narrow bed after Hollis's dinner and understood something about herself that she hadn't wanted to look at directly. Caleb, she said, I need to think. I know. I'm not... She chose the words carefully. I'm not someone who makes this kind of decision from momentum. I need to be sure I'm thinking clearly and not just feeling clearly. Those are different things. He nodded. Take the time. I will. She picked her pen back up, and the accounts were still there, and the morning continued the way it had been going. But the air in the kitchen had changed by a degree that was not large and was not small, and she felt it in the way you feel a shift in pressure before weather comes. Not the weather itself, just the knowledge that something was building. She told Margaret on Monday. Not all of it, but enough. That Hollis had shown continued interest, that Caleb had said what he'd said, that she was sitting with both of them and not sure which way was forward. Margaret listened without interrupting, which was itself a measure of how seriously she was taking it. Hollis is offering you a position in this town, Margaret said when Clara was finished. Respectable wife, good house, money enough. You'd never worry about $41 again. She paused. What's Caleb offering? A ranch that's barely breaking even, and 2 children who need a mother and a man who took 2 years to say 12 sentences to me. Margaret was quiet. And everything else, Clara said, because that was the honest end of the sentence. All the rest of it, which is the part I don't know how to calculate. Margaret looked at her for a long time with the expression of someone who has opinions and is exercising uncharacteristic restraint about sharing them. Then she said, What does your gut tell you? My gut has gotten me into difficulty before. It's also gotten you out of it. Margaret handed her a stack of shirts to fold. What does it tell you? Clara folded the first shirt, the second. She didn't answer for a while. It tells me, she said finally, that I'm afraid of being wrong. You're going to be wrong about something no matter what you choose, Margaret said, without comfort and without cruelty. That's not the question. The question is which kind of wrong you can live with. Clara folded the third shirt and said nothing, because Margaret was right, and she hated it only a little. Hollis came to find her Wednesday afternoon. He was at the laundry counter when she came from the back, and he had that same easy quality he always had in public. The man who was always at home wherever he stood, which was a gift, and also, she had come to think, something to watch carefully. Ease that was always present regardless of circumstance was sometimes not ease at all, but its performance. I'd like to take you to dinner, he said. Properly. Just the 2 of us. The hotel dining room Friday, if you're willing. Clara looked at him. He was handsome in the polished way he was always handsome, and he was looking at her with the confident, attentive look of a man who was accustomed to getting what he decided he wanted. Mr. Hollis, she said. Martin, he said. Martin. She kept her voice even. Before I say yes to dinner, I want to be straightforward with you. I appreciate your attention. I find you to be an interesting and accomplished man. But I'm not at a point where I can offer you certainty about what your interests might lead to. If that's something you can sit with, then yes to dinner. He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, more like recalibration. Men like Hollis did not often receive honest assessments of the terms up front, she suspected. They expected women to navigate carefully around the edges of what was being offered. I appreciate that, he said, and she couldn't entirely tell if he did. Yes. Friday. She told Margaret, who said, good girl, in a tone that was wholly ambiguous. The dinner was fine. He was good company, smart and wide-read, and with real stories from his years in Denver that were worth hearing. He asked her questions and listened to the answers with what appeared to be genuine interest, and he did not rush her, and he did not say anything overtly that she could find fault with. But there was a moment somewhere between the soup and the main course where he said, "You wouldn't have to work at the laundry, of course. There'd be no need." And it was said so smoothly, as part of something else, that she almost didn't catch what was in it. She caught it. Not the words were generous. What was in it was the assumption that the laundry was a thing she was enduring rather than doing, that the correct future was one in which she was freed from the need to use her own hands. She did not correct him. It wasn't the right moment, and it wasn't the right battle. But she put it in the column where it belonged and carried it home with her and set it next to everything else she was weighing. It was the following Saturday that things came to a head in the way that life tends to arrange. Not dramatically, and not on any schedule she had asked for, but with the particular timing of something that has been building for long enough. She arrived at the ranch at the usual time and let herself through the gate, and Eli was not at the fence watching the road, which was unusual enough that she noticed it. The yard was quieter than normal. The kitchen door was open. She went in to find Anna alone at the table. Not doing homework, just sitting there with her hands flat on the table and her face carrying something Clara hadn't seen on her before. Not the careful watchfulness, not the guarded evaluation, but a rawness that the girl clearly hadn't had time to put away before Clara came in. "Where's your father?" Clara asked. "South pasture. The fence came down in the wind last night. He's been out since before light." Anna looked at her hands. "Eli went with him." Clara sat down. She didn't ask what was wrong. She had found with Anna that direct questions produce closed doors, while simply being still in the same room sometimes produced the thing that questions couldn't reach. It took 3 minutes. "Mrs. Fielding said something at school," Anna said. She was staring at the table. "About you?" Clara waited. "She said you were going to marry Mr. Hollis." Anna's voice was flat in the way that meant it was anything but. "She said everyone in town knows it." "Mrs. Fielding doesn't know everything in town," Clara said. "She said you'd be stupid to stay at the laundry when someone like him was offering." Anna's jaw was tight. "She said Pa couldn't offer you anything." The kitchen was very quiet. "Anna," Clara said, I know it's not my business." The girl's voice had developed a crack in it that she was clearly trying to hold together. "You're not ours. I know that. You just come on Saturdays and you help with the books and..." She stopped. Started again with obvious effort. "I'm not going to cry about it. I just wanted to say that before whatever you decide, you should know that you're the first person who ever asked me what I was thinking instead of just telling me what to do." She looked up. Her eyes were dry, fiercely. "And Eli would miss you more than he'd ever say out loud. And Pa..." She stopped. "What about your Pa?" Clara said quietly. Anna shook her head. "He doesn't say things like that. But he went out this morning and the fence didn't come down all that bad. There was other work that needed doing more." She looked at the table again. "He just needed to go somewhere." Clara sat very still. She thought about what Margaret had said. Which kind of wrong can you live with? She thought about Hollis saying there'd be no need, and the assumption in it that she would fit neatly into the space he had already imagined for her. She thought about $41 and how frightened she had been, and how that fear had stayed close to her all these months like a hand on her shoulder, reminding her what safety meant. And she thought about this girl sitting across from her with dry, fierce eyes, trying not to want something she'd decided she wasn't allowed to want. "I haven't made any decision," Clara said. "I want you to hear that clearly. Whatever Mrs. Fielding told you, she was working from gossip, not facts." Anna looked up. "But I also want to tell you something." Clara kept her voice even. "What you said just now, about how I'm the first person who asked what you were thinking, that's something you should carry. Not because of me, because it tells you what you need, and knowing what you need is not a small thing. A lot of people go their whole lives without figuring that out." Anna's throat moved. "You're a remarkable girl," Clara said. "Not because you're easy, because you're honest when you could be closed, and that costs something." The door opened and Eli came in, mud to the knee, and immediately filling the kitchen with the particular energy he always brought, and then read the room in the way he was unnervingly good at and said, "Did something happen?" "No," Anna said, and stood up and went to her room, and Clara heard the door close and then something that might have been a single contained sob, and then silence. Eli looked at Clara. "She okay?" "She will be," Clara said. "Are you?" She looked at him, 8 years old, mud-covered, direct as a plumb line. I'm thinking, she said. Pa's thinking too, Eli said. He thinks a lot when he fixes things. He sat down and pulled off one boot. He fixed the fence, and then he fixed the water trough, and then he started on the gate hinge, and I think he was going to find more things to fix, but I got cold. Clara was quiet. Clara, Eli said. He said her name without the miss the way he always did, the comfortable carelessness of someone who has decided a person belongs in their world. Yes. If you went away, not went away like left town, but went away like stopped coming here, would you still be all right? She looked at him carefully. Why are you asking? He shrugged with one shoulder in the way he did when something mattered to him. Because if you would be all right, then I could be all right about it too. But if you wouldn't... He left the end of that sentence open in a way that was more eloquent than its completion. Eli, she said, go get your other boot off and get warm. Okay, he said, and then, I'm glad you came to Silver Ridge, even if Harold died and that was sad, because otherwise we wouldn't have known you. He went to the fire and she sat at the table with the account books in front of her, and the scratch of something in her chest that she finally, quietly, allowed herself to name. Caleb came in from the yard mid-afternoon. He was cold and tired and had grease on his forearm, and his hair needed cutting in the same way it always needed cutting. And he stood in the kitchen doorway in a posture that was somehow both a question and a refusal to ask it. Sit down, Clara said. He sat. She closed the account book. She had been going through it not because there was urgent work, but because having something in her hands made the next part possible. I've been thinking, she said. I gathered. I've been thinking about what you said last Saturday. She kept her eyes on the closed book. And I've been thinking about Hollis, and I've been thinking about what I came here with and what I have now, and what the different choices in front of me actually mean. He said nothing. Martin Hollis is offering me something I can count, she said. A house, a position in this town, security that doesn't depend on whether Margaret has enough work or whether the price of cattle goes up or down. She looked up. I would be a fool not to consider it. I know, he said. He said it without self-pity, just flat and factual. But I've spent 3 months in this house. She held his eyes. And what I've found in it is nothing like what I expected to find anywhere. She paused. You told me you notice when Saturday comes. I notice too, Caleb. I've been fighting it because I can't afford to be wrong. I came here broke and alone, and I built something small but mine, and I'm scared of gambling that on a feeling. I'm not asking you to gamble, he said. I'm asking you to choose. There's a difference. She looked at him across the kitchen table and thought about Anna's fierce, dry eyes and Eli's mud-covered directness, and the way this house felt on Saturday mornings, like something she hadn't known she was missing until she walked into it. If I choose this, she said slowly, I'm choosing the hard version. A ranch that barely breaks even, and 2 children who have already lost one mother, and a man who takes 3 months to say 12 words. Fair, he said quietly. And a town that has already decided what my story is and will take some time to revise it. She let the silence sit for a moment. I know what I'm choosing. He leaned forward slightly, just enough. Then what are you doing? She looked at him for a long time, at the tiredness in his face that was honest and unmanaged, at the hands on the table that showed what kind of work he did, at the man who had not once asked her to need him and had simply shown up, consistently, in all the ways that consistency mattered. I need a few days, she said, not because I'm uncertain, because I need to be sure I'm choosing forward and not just away from something. He held her gaze and nodded. All right, she said. She left at the usual time. He did not offer to bring the wagon around. She did not expect him to. She walked the 4 miles back to town in the long spring evening light, with the mountains holding everything up on all sides, and Silver Ridge appeared in the distance, and she walked toward it with her boots on the hard road and her mind working through something that was no longer arithmetic. She went to Hollis the next day. Not to the dinner table, to his office, which was on the main street and had his name on the door in gilt letters. And she walked in without having sent word ahead because she didn't want to give herself time to rehearse what she was going to say. He looked up from his desk with surprise and pleasure, and the pleasure was genuine, she thought. He was not a dishonest man. She had never thought that. He was simply a man with a particular idea about how things should be arranged, and she was not willing to be arranged. Miss Bennet, he stood. This is unexpected. I know. She didn't sit down. I wanted to be straightforward with you, Martin, because you've been straightforward with me, and you deserve the same in return. He read her face. He was intelligent. He read it quickly. I'm not going to accept your offer, she said, not because there's anything wrong with what you're offering, but because it's not what I'm choosing. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Ryder. Not a question. That's my business, she said gently. But yes. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is deciding between several things, and she could see the calculation, the pride that wanted to be wounded, and underneath it the genuine feeling of a person who has been turned down and is sitting with it. She respected that he let the calculation play out and chose the cleaner thing. He's a fortunate man, Hollis said, whether he knows it or not. Thank you, she said. I mean that. She left his office and stood on the main street of Silver Ridge in the afternoon light, with the decision made and settled into her like something that had always been waiting to set. She did not go to the ranch. She went back to her room above the tailor's shop, and she sat on her narrow bed and she looked out the window at the roof of the adjacent building, and she let herself feel the full weight of what she had just done. Not with regret, but with the seriousness the thing deserved. She had turned down the safe choice. She had done it with clear eyes and full knowledge of what she was turning down. The fear was there. She did not pretend it wasn't. But underneath it, quieter and more persistent, was something she had not felt since she was young, and the world had still seemed like something that could surprise her with good things. She was ready. But she was not going to the ranch today or tomorrow. She had said she needed a few days, and she had meant it. Not to reconsider, but to make sure that when she went back out that road, she went with something clean and certain, not something breathless and half-formed. She owed Caleb Ryder the best version of her yes. She owed herself the time to make sure it was the right one. She sat with it until the light changed, and then she got up and lit her lamp and made herself a simple dinner, and did not, for one evening, think about accounts or laundry prices or cattle markets or any of the practical mathematics that had kept her sane all these months. She just thought about a kitchen table and 2 children and a chair that creaked, and a man who fixed things when he had nowhere to put what he was feeling. And she thought, I know what I want. I have known for a while. I was just waiting until I could say it without being afraid. She was still afraid. But she had been afraid since she stepped off that stage in the mud, and she had built something anyway. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. She had just needed Silver Ridge to remind her of it. She went back on a Thursday. Not Saturday, not the arranged day, not the expected time. Thursday morning, when the laundry was closed because Margaret had gone to her sister's in the next county and told Clara to take the day, which Margaret had never done before, and which Clara suspected was not entirely coincidental. She walked the 4 miles east in the early morning with the spring air cold enough to still need a coat, but with something underneath it that smelled like thaw. The particular smell of ground that has been frozen a long time and is beginning to remember what it used to be. She had not sent word. She had simply walked. Caleb was in the yard when she came around the bend in the road. I was working on the wagon wheel, crouched down beside it with a wrench, and he heard her footsteps on the hard ground and looked up. He didn't stand immediately. He just looked at her across the distance of the yard with the morning light flat and clear between them. And she could not read his face from that far, but she could read his stillness, which was the stillness of a man who had been waiting without letting himself admit he was waiting. She stopped at the gate. It's Thursday, he said. I know what day it is, she said. He stood, set the wrench down on top of the wheel, came toward her in the unhurried way he did everything, and she was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she was not usually aware of it, and she let it be what it was instead of talking herself past it. He stopped on the other side of the gate. I turned Hollis down yesterday, she said. He held her eyes. I didn't come here to tell you that so you'd feel obligated. She kept her voice steady. I came here to tell you that I've thought it through clearly, and I know what I want, and I'm not afraid of it anymore. A pause. Or I'm still afraid of it, but that's not the same as being wrong about it. Caleb reached over and unlatched the gate and opened it. He didn't say anything. She walked through and he closed the gate behind her, and they stood in the yard in the morning light for a moment that was not dramatic and was not smooth and was entirely real. I'm not an easy person, she said. I want you to know that going in. I have opinions about things and I'll tell you what they are. I don't need to be managed. I noticed, he said. The corner of his mouth moved. Your books are a mess. They were a mess, he said. They're better now. Your fence needs work in 3 more places besides the south. I know. And your children are… She stopped because that part was harder to say plainly, and she needed a moment for it. Your children are something I did not expect, she said. They got into me before I had any defenses up, and I want you to know that whatever we're deciding here, it's not… She pressed forward through the difficulty of it. I'm not choosing them because I need somewhere to put my feeling. I'm choosing them because they're worth choosing. That's different. Caleb looked at her for a long time with the careful, full attention she had come to understand was simply how he was. Not a performance of listening, but the actual thing. Clara, he said, will you marry me? He said it simply. No staging, no preamble, no preparation of the ground. Just the question, plain as a fence post. She had expected to need another moment. She didn't. Yes, she said. I will. He exhaled, not dramatically, just the breath of a man who has been holding something and has set it down. He reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her beyond accidental proximity, and his hand was rough from the work and warm from being alive, and she held it and did not look away. There are going to be hard days, he said. I know that. The ranch is not… I know what the ranch is, she said. I did your accounts. He almost laughed at that, the real kind that surprised him, and it changed his face entirely, and she thought, there it is. There is what this man looks like when he's not carrying everything. From the direction of the house, the door opened. Eli appeared on the porch with the uncanny timing of a child who has possibly been watching from a window since she came around the bend in the road. Is she staying? He called. Caleb looked at Clara. I'm staying, she called back. Eli went back inside, and she heard him say something to Anna that she couldn't make out, and then what she thought, she wasn't certain, might have been Anna laughing. The wedding was 6 weeks later. It was not a large affair, which suited both of them. The judge's office on a Saturday morning, with Margaret and Eli and Anna as witnesses, and a meal afterward at the hotel dining room that Mrs. Hartwell had offered at a kind rate, and then refused to let Clara pay for it all, which was Mrs. Hartwell's way of approving of things, quietly, without acknowledgement, by doing something she wouldn't have done otherwise. Clara wore the green dress again, and Margaret gave her a small bunch of early wildflowers that she said she'd found by the road and had definitely not specifically gone looking for. Eli wore his good shirt and his hair combed flat in a way that lasted approximately 40 minutes before gravity won. Anna wore a blue dress and stood beside Clara during the ceremony, with her shoulder almost touching Clara's arm, close enough to be deliberate, and when the judge finished and Caleb and Clara signed the paper and it was done, Anna reached over without looking at her and tucked her hand briefly into Clara's, just for a moment, and then let go and looked at the wall as if nothing had happened. Clara did not make anything of it. She filed it in the place where the most important things went. The town had opinions about the marriage, as the town always had opinions about everything. Some were generous. Mrs. Hartwell told Margaret that it was about time Caleb stopped managing alone, and 2 of the women who brought laundry in told Clara they were pleased for her. Some were pointed. Mrs. Fielding, who had told Anna that Clara would be stupid not to take Hollis, managed to convey through her congratulations that she thought this was a mistake, and the wife of one of the merchants said, at a volume she perhaps believed was private, that it was hard to imagine what kind of sensible woman chose a struggling ranch over Martin Hollis's house. Clara let it run off. She had not made this choice to satisfy Silver Ridge, and Silver Ridge's opinion was not part of the calculation. This was the particular freedom of having thought something through clearly. Other people's doubt didn't find purchase. Hollis himself was civil. He nodded to her on the street. He did not make enemies where he didn't need to, and she respected the quality without warming to it. They were, she thought, simply 2 people who had wanted different things and had said so, and the world had continued without drama. That was the best outcome available, and she was satisfied with it. What she was less satisfied with in those first weeks was the daily work of the things she'd chosen. Marriage, she discovered, was nothing like the Saturdays. The Saturdays had been a version of this life with the rough edges sanded off. She arrived, she worked, she observed, she went home. She did not wake at 5 in the morning to a kitchen that needed fire built in it. She did not navigate the specific complicated territory of 2 children who had their own rhythms and rules and histories that preceded her entirely. She did not lie awake calculating the spring planting against the operating costs against the fence repairs and the possibility of a dry summer hitting the water supply. She did not, on the Saturdays, have to learn how to be in the same house as Caleb Ryder after dark. That last part was the quietest difficulty, the one she had least prepared for. Not because he was unkind, he was never unkind, but because they were two people with their full separate natures, learning to exist in the same rooms, and the learning of it had friction that the Saturdays had not shown her. He was quieter in the evenings than she'd expected, and it had taken her 2 weeks to understand that the quiet was not distance, but was simply how he came down from the day. That he needed an hour of low talking or no talking before he was ready to be fully present again. She had initially taken it as something withheld, and it had made her sharp at the dinner table, and they'd had a short-edged conversation about it on a Wednesday night that neither of them had handled perfectly. "I'm not ignoring you," he said, with a flatness that meant he was closer to the edge of patient than he usually came. "I didn't say you were," she said, which was technically accurate and practically dishonest. He looked at her across the kitchen table. "What did you say?" She set her fork down. "I said dinner was quiet." "Dinner is quiet. I've had a full day. I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not the kind of person who can talk from the moment I walk in until I fall asleep. I wasn't like that before, and I'm not going to be like that now." "I'm not asking you to be," she said. "Then what are you asking?" She looked at him and made herself be honest. "I'm asking you to tell me when you need quiet, so I'm not sitting here guessing whether the quiet means something." A pause. Something shifted in his face. "Fair," he said. "Fair enough." "Thank you," she said. They ate the rest of the dinner more or less peacefully, and afterward he sat with her on the porch for an hour without speaking much. And it was different. The same silence, but with a shape she understood now, a quality of chosen presence rather than retreat. She was learning that there were many kinds of quiet, and that not all of them were something to fix. She was learning other things too. The garden on the east side of the house had been Helen Ryder's, Caleb's first wife, and it had not been touched since she died. Clara had known this from Eli's many conversational offerings, and from the visible evidence of a space that had been deliberately left alone, not neglected in the way of something forgotten, but undisturbed in the way of something that carried weight. She had not approached it. She had walked past it every time she went between the house and the yard, and she had not looked at it hard, because she understood without being told that some spaces required permission. She asked Caleb on a Saturday, the real Saturday, with its familiar structure, which felt different now that she was already in the house when it arrived, whether he would mind if she looked at what was there. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do with it?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I want to see what's there first." He looked at the garden and then at her. "It was her place," he said. "She grew things. She was good at it." He paused. "I haven't gone in since." "I know. The children might—" He didn't finish that. "I'll ask them," she said. "If either of them says no, I won't touch it." She asked Anna first because Anna was the one who mattered more on this particular question, and she asked her directly. Not gently, not sideways, but straight, the way she'd found worked best with this girl. "Your mother's garden," she said. "Would it bother you if I worked in it? Not to change it, just to see what needs doing." Anna looked at her for a long time. "She had tomatoes," she said finally, "and something with purple flowers that I don't know the name of. She used to let me help with the tomatoes. Would you want to again? If they came back?" Anna was quiet. "You don't have to," Clara said. "I might," Anna said, which from Anna was yes. The garden was more salvageable than it looked from the outside. 2 seasons of neglect had taken a toll, but Helen Ryder had built it well. The beds were solidly edged, the soil underneath the weeds was dark and workable, and one corner had a rosemary plant that had survived entirely on its own and was frankly thriving, which Clara took as a sign of either good soil or a plant with something to prove. She cleared it in stages, an hour at a time, in the morning before the laundry and on her evenings. She did not rush it. The tomatoes she started from seeds ordered through the general store, which took 3 weeks to arrive and cost more than she'd expected, and she started them inside on the south-facing windowsill and watched them with more attention than she generally allowed herself to give to any one thing. Anna began coming to stand in the doorway while she watered them. Clara did not comment on this. One morning, Anna came all the way in and looked at the seedlings for a while and said, "They're bigger than last week." 3 more weeks before they can go outside, Clara said. The frost risk. Anna looked at them. Mama used to talk to hers. Did they grow better for it? She thought so. A pause. She thought they liked the company. Clara looked at the seedlings. I can try. Anna made a sound that might have been a short laugh. It was there and gone quickly, as if it had surprised her. She went back to her schoolwork without further comment, but the next morning she came and stood beside Clara at the windowsill and said quietly to the seedlings, "You'd better grow." Clara did not make anything of it. She watered the seedlings and moved on to the breakfast dishes and filed Anna's quiet statement in the most important column where it would stay. Caleb had been right that there would be hard days. He had, if anything, undersold the category. The spring operating costs came in harder than projected because one of the supply prices had gone up without warning, and the rain in May was insufficient and required extra water hauling that ate into the hands' time and therefore into the work they were supposed to be doing elsewhere. Clara recalculated. She found 2 places to cut and one place where they'd been overpaying for a service Caleb had arranged in a worse year and hadn't renegotiated. If we drop the second supply run and do it once a month instead of twice, it saves $12 over the season, she told him one evening over the account books. He looked at the number. The timing's tight. It is. It's workable if the fence holds. The fence will hold. He said it with the flatness of a man who has fixed something and intends for it to stay fixed. She made a note. She was developing a habit of annotating the accounts with context, not just the numbers but what surrounded them, the conditions that produced them, so that next year she would have a truer picture. She had told Caleb this, and he had said, without irony, "I married the right person," and it had landed somewhere in her chest in the specific way that understated things sometimes do, and she had gone back to the accounts and not said anything. The cattle sale came in June. Hargrove's directly, no middleman. The numbers were the honest market numbers, and they were better than the previous years had been. And when she showed Caleb the final tally, he stood in the kitchen holding the paper with a look on his face that was not quite relief and not quite pride, but lived in the space between them. $63 better than last year, he said. More, actually. The market was up. He set the paper down. He looked at her, and there was something in the look that she had come to know as the version of him that didn't reach for words, that said things in the set of his face and the stillness of him instead. She had learned to read it without needing it translated. "Don't thank me," she said. "I wasn't going to thank you," he said. "I was going to say that I noticed things too, not just you, what you've done here." He paused. "The garden, the books, what you've done with Anna." He looked at the window. She talked about her mother last night. First time in 8 months she said her mother's name without going quiet after. Clara didn't say anything. "That's you," Caleb said. "Not what you told her to do. What you let her do on her own time." "She needed space," Clara said, "not management." "I know that now." He looked at her directly. "I didn't know how to give it. I was so busy trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart that I—" He stopped. Started again. "I wasn't giving them room. I was just keeping them upright. There's a difference." "You were one person doing everything," Clara said. "That's not a character flaw. It cost them something." "Maybe. But you're here now and you're paying attention. That's not nothing." She meant it. She had known men who would not have made the admission he just had, not to themselves, and certainly not out loud. "They know you love them, Caleb. They've always known that. The rest we can work on." He was quiet for a moment. The evening was coming through the windows in that long summer way, slow and golden, and the kitchen smelled of dinner, and the small familiar smell of this house that she had gradually learned was made up of feed and wood smoke and the lavender she'd put in the linen. "Are you glad?" he asked. Plainly, the way he asked the things that mattered. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Not in a simple way. It's harder than I expected, and some mornings I'm more tired than I've ever been in my life. And I've had to learn things about myself that weren't entirely flattering." She held his gaze. "But yes, I am." He nodded. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers for a moment. Not romantic in the performed sense, just the weight of him, the warmth, the acknowledgement. Then he picked up the tally sheet and stood. The South Water Trough needs work tomorrow, he said. I know, Eli told me. Of course he did. He paused at the door. Clara. Yes. The fence in the north corner. You said 3 more places needed work when you first came. He said it was something that might have been embarrassment had he been a more self-conscious man. I found all 3. She looked at him. Just wanted you to know I was listening, he said. He went out to the yard, and she sat at the table with the account books and the summer evening and the particular quiet of a house that was full in all the ways that counted, and she let herself have the feeling without putting a name on it right away. She was still afraid sometimes. She had not stopped being afraid, but she had come to understand that the fear was not a sign of mistake. It was a sign that the thing she was doing mattered enough to be afraid of, and that was a distinction worth keeping hold of. Gerald Thorne made his move in July. She had expected something. She was not naive enough to think a man like Thorne would absorb a public slight and let it settle without return. He had been quietly, specifically unfriendly since the cattle sale, and the way of it was the way of men who preferred to work through channels rather than confrontation. A word here, a suggestion there, the slow accumulation of small doubts in the right ears. What she had not expected was the specific angle he chose. She heard it from Margaret, who heard it from the judge's clerk, which meant it was already established enough to be passing through official corridors. Thorne had been suggesting that the writer accounts had irregularities. Not fraud, exactly. He was too careful for that. But the implication that a woman with no local standing and a recent arrival had been managing a ranch's financial records in a way that warranted a look. Margaret told her on a Monday morning with the careful face of someone delivering something she wishes she didn't have to. Clara stood very still while Margaret talked. She let the information settle into the shape of what it actually was. He's not accusing me of anything specific, she said when Margaret was done. No, that's the point. He doesn't have to. Margaret's voice was flat with anger she was keeping controlled. He just suggests, and people who don't know you well enough start wondering. Who's heard it? Hartwell, the doctor, a couple of the merchants. Margaret paused. Judge Carver himself. Clara nodded slowly. All right. Clara. I need to go home, Clara said, which was the first time she had said home, meaning the ranch, and she noticed it as she said it and filed it away. She walked the 4 miles east in the July heat with the sun direct and no cloud cover, and she arrived at the ranch sweated through and with her jaw set in a way that Caleb, who was in the yard, recognized before she'd said a word. What happened? He said. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to rely on in him, that he did not rush to fix or minimize before he had the full shape of the problem. He stood with his hands at his sides, and he listened to all of it. When she was done, the silence ran for several seconds. The books are clean, he said. Not a question. Every entry documented, every decision traceable. I've kept records of my reasoning, not just the numbers. She had done this from the beginning, the habit of a person who had learned that you could not control what people decided to think, but you could control what evidence existed. If anyone looks at those books, they will find nothing to support what he's suggesting. Then we let them look, Caleb said. Yes. She looked at him. I want to go to Judge Carver myself, not through someone else, not waiting for it to die down, directly, with the books. He met her eyes. When? Tomorrow morning. Will you come with me? You don't need me to come. I know I don't need you, she said. I'm asking if you will. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I will. They went together the next morning, she with 3 months of documented accounts in a leather case she'd bought specifically for carrying them, and Caleb with the quiet solidity of a man who has decided where he stands and does not need to announce it. Judge Carver was a dry, careful man of 60 who had been running the county's legal apparatus for 20 years and had seen enough of human nature to have strong opinions about most of it. He received them without obvious surprise, which meant he had been expecting this and had probably already formed a view of it. Clara set the books on his desk and opened them and walked him through 3 months of accounts with the methodical clarity of someone who is prepared for this exact moment. She showed him the documentation behind every significant decision. She showed him the cattle sale research, the comparison figures, the letter to Hargroves. She showed him the original fee arrangement with Caleb, which had always been a fair wage for documented work. Judge Carver turned pages. He asked 3 questions. She answered all of them precisely. At the end, he closed the last book and looked at it for a moment, and then looked at her. "Mr. Thorne," he said, with the particular dryness of a man choosing his words, "has not made a formal complaint to this office. He has made comments in social settings that reached me through the usual channels." He looked at her steadily. "What you've shown me today is not the work of someone who has anything to hide. It is, in fact, considerably more thorough documentation than I see from most ranchers in this county." A pause. "I'll say that to the appropriate people." Clara held his gaze. "I'd appreciate that." "I imagine you would." He handed the books back to her. "Mrs. Ryder." It was the first time he had used her married name. She noticed it. She thought he intended her to. They walked out into the July morning, and Caleb held the door, and on the steps of the judge's office, Clara exhaled. Not the performance of relief, but the real thing, slow and complete. "Well," she said. "Well," Caleb said, "it's not finished. Thorne isn't finished." "No," he agreed. "But Carver is a man of influence, and he doesn't like implications that go unsubstantiated. Thorne will know that. He'll find another angle." "Probably." Caleb looked at the street. "And we'll deal with that angle when it comes." He looked at her. "You were formidable in there." "I was prepared," she said. "It's not the same thing." "It is, when you're the one who prepared." He said it plainly, without performance. She looked at him standing on the steps of the judge's office in the July heat, squinting a little against the sun, and she thought about the woman who had arrived in this town with $41 and no plan and a dead uncle's address, and the person she was now, standing beside this man on this morning with 3 months of clean documented accounts in her hands. Not the same person, not entirely, the same at the core, but built up in places she hadn't known needed building. "Let's go home," she said. They walked to where the wagon was hitched and drove the 4 miles east, and the summer country opened up around them, and Silver Ridge fell behind, and the ranch appeared in the distance with its new south fence and its east garden, and the smoke coming from the kitchen where Anna had said she would start dinner. Clara sat on the wagon bench with the account books in her lap, and the sun on her face, and the man beside her quiet in the good way, the chosen presence way, and she looked at where they were going and let it be what it was. It was not perfect. It had never been perfect. The ranch was still tight on operating costs, and the North Water Trough still needed work, and there were mornings when she was tired in a way that ran to the bone, and Caleb was still a man of too few evening words, and she was still a woman who occasionally went too sharp when she should have gone soft. But the garden on the east side had tomatoes coming in, the first ones, still green, small and hard and entirely promising. And Anna had been watching them every morning before school, and Eli had told Clara at breakfast that one of the calves had gotten a name, which Eli had given it without asking permission, and the name was Clara, which was either a very great compliment or a comment on her stubbornness, and possibly both. The wagon wheel on the left side still made a sound she didn't like. She would add it to the list. The wagon wheel got fixed in August. Caleb did it on a Sunday morning while Clara sat on the porch steps going through the month's accounts, and she heard the particular sound of it stopping, the small, wrong noise it had made every time they went over rough ground, present since before she arrived and likely present for a year before that, just one of the 100 things that had been waiting behind more urgent things. When it stopped, she looked up from the accounts and Caleb was standing beside the wheel with the wrench and not saying anything about it. And she went back to the accounts and didn't say anything either. But she put a small mark in the margin of the ledger. Not a number, just a mark. The way she had taken to noting things that mattered in ways that didn't have a column. That was the summer in its particular shape. Things got fixed. Not all at once, not without cost, and not without the occasional week when something new broke before the last thing was finished. But the rhythm of the ranch had changed from the rhythm of a place that was being held together to the rhythm of a place that was being built. And that was a different thing entirely. And anyone who had known it in the 2 years before Clara came would have felt the difference without being able to name it precisely. Thorne had gone quiet after the visit to Judge Carver. Not publicly conciliatory. He was not that kind of man, but quiet, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Clara saw him twice at the general store and once at the bank, and he nodded to her each time with the precise civility of a man who has recalculated and decided that continued hostility carries more cost than it's worth. She nodded back. She did not warm to him, and she did not pretend to, but she did not carry it around as a grievance either. The books were clean. The judge had seen them. That was the end of the story she needed from that particular chapter. What she had not entirely predicted was what happened to the town's opinion of her, slowly, the way opinions in small places tend to move, not in a single moment of revision, but in the accumulation of small observations. Margaret told her in September that Mrs. Fielding had asked after her at the laundry. "Asked after you specifically," Margaret said, with the emphasis on specifically that meant this was notable. "Wanted to know how you were getting on at the ranch." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were getting on fine and that the writer accounts were the cleanest in the county." Margaret folded a sheet with sharp precision. She said she'd heard as much from the judge's clerk. Clara thought about Mrs. Fielding, who had told Anna that Clara would be stupid not to take Hollis, who had decided what Clara's story was before Clara had decided it herself. She felt no particular satisfaction in the revision. The woman had formed an opinion from available evidence and revised it when the evidence changed. That was more than a lot of people managed. "Tell her I said thank you for asking," Clara said, and went back to the sorting. Oh, the tomatoes came in September, the way things in the high country come in. Later than you want them, sweeter for the wait. Anna brought the first one in herself, picked it from the vine in the east garden on a Saturday morning, with the particular ceremony of someone who has been watching something grow for 3 months and cannot quite believe it has become what it became. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at it, and then she looked at Clara, and then she looked at it again. "It's the right color," she said. "It is," Clara said. "Mama used to say you couldn't rush them." Anna looked at the tomato with an expression that was complicated in the way 12-year-old expressions are complicated, present and past layered over each other without full separation. She said if you picked them too early, you just got a hard red thing, not a real one. She was right, Clara said. Anna was quiet for a moment, then, "She would have liked you, I think." She said it with the careful precision of someone who has thought about it and chosen the words deliberately. She liked people who did things instead of talked about doing things. Clara stood very still. She had not expected that. She was not sure she had words equal to it, and she was wise enough not to reach for ones that weren't. "Thank you, Anna," she said. "Just that." Anna nodded, the small conclusive nod of someone who has said what needed saying and is now finished with it, and she picked up the tomato and took it to the cutting board and began slicing it for lunch. And the kitchen had the smell of late summer and something opening rather than closing, and Clara turned to the stove and let the moment settle into its place. Eli came in from the yard 10 minutes later with mud on his boots and an opinion about the tomatoes that he delivered at volume. And Anna told him to take his boots off, and he argued, and Clara told him both things could be true. He could take his boots off, and the tomatoes could be excellent. And Caleb appeared in the doorway and assessed the scene with the quick look of a man who knows his own kitchen and said, "Eli, boots." And Eli took his boots off. It was not a scene of great consequence. It was lunch on a Saturday in September. But Clara looked at it. The four of them in the kitchen, the argument about boots, the tomatoes on the cutting board, the particular ordinary noise of a family being a family. And she understood that this was what she had chosen. Not the idea of it, the actual texture of it, imperfect and loud and real. She had made the right choice. She had known it before, but she knew it more completely now, in the specific way you know things that have been tested and have held. Winter came early that year, which Silver Ridge winters tended to do without apology. By November, the passes were difficult, and the ranch work shifted inward. The animals managed closer to the barn, the outdoor repairs that remained on the list pushed to spring, the days shorter and the evenings longer, and the kitchen, the center of everything, the way it becomes when the cold makes the rest of the world small. Clara had left the laundry. She had done it in October, after a conversation with Margaret that was shorter than she'd expected. "The ranch needs full time," Clara said, "not Saturdays and mornings, full time." Margaret had looked at her in the assessing way she still sometimes did, the way of a woman calculating something. "Can you manage without the wage?" "We worked out the numbers," Clara said. "If the spring cattle sale holds, yes. And if it doesn't? Then we'll recalculate." She held Margaret's gaze. "I trust the numbers." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've been the best worker I've had in 12 years. She said it in the same voice she used for everything, flat and direct, without sentiment. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me. She handed Clara her final week's pay. Come have dinner with us Sunday. George asks after you. Clara came to dinner Sunday, and the following Sunday as well, and the one after that, and this too became a structure. The Sunday dinners at Margaret's that were not required and not obligated, and were simply the thing that happened because people who care about each other make time without making ceremony of it. She had not understood when she arrived in Silver Ridge that the town would become hers, not through any single act, but through the accumulation of presents, the Saturdays, the laundry, the accounts, the judge's office, the dinners at Margaret's, Anna's arithmetic, the tomatoes, the fixed wagon wheel, the Sunday mornings when she and Caleb sat on the porch in the cold, because they had both developed the habit of an hour outside before the day began, and neither of them had decided to stop. You do not belong to a place because you arrived there, or even because you stayed. You belong to it because it knows you, your failures and your stubbornness, and the things you got wrong before you got them right. And you're still there when the knowing is done. Silver Ridge knew her now. She had let it. That was the choice underneath all the other choices, the one she had made and kept making every day she stayed. The letter from Thorne came in December. Not a social letter. A legal one through his attorney, which was how she knew he had found a new angle and thought enough of it to formalize it. She read it at the kitchen table in the early morning before the children were up, and she read it twice, and then she folded it and put it beside the account books and went to make coffee. Caleb found it when he came down. He read it standing at the table, still in his coat from the morning chores, and she watched his face go through the particular series of things faces do when the content of a document is worse than expected. Then he set it down and looked at her. He's claiming the cattle transaction with Hargroves violated a prior verbal agreement, he said. There was no prior verbal agreement. Nothing was ever signed with Thorne. Nothing was ever put in writing because he preferred it that way. She kept her voice even. Which means there's no document to produce, which means the documentation that exists is ours. He'll say the verbal agreement predates the documentation. He can say it. She put the coffee in front of him and sat down. He can't prove it. And we can prove every step of what we did and why. She opened the account book to the page she had already found. The research I did before the sale, it's all dated. The letter to Hargroves, dated and copied. The market figures, sourced. She looked at him. He chose a man who keeps records to accuse. That's a strategic error. Caleb looked at the account book, then at her. You're not worried. I'm worried, she said. I'm not frightened. Those are different things. He was quiet for a moment. What do we do? We go back to Judge Carver, with the letter and the documentation. We don't wait for him to come to us. She closed the account book. He's done this before, I think. Not to us. To someone without records. He counted on people not being able to defend themselves. You think he's done this to other ranchers? I think it's worth asking. She looked at him directly. Do you know anyone else who used Thorne as a broker and came away with less than they expected? Caleb was quiet. She could see him going through years of ranchers' conversations, the kind that happen at feed stores and cattle sales, the complaints that are said once and let go because there's no clear object for them. Tom Briggs, he said slowly, the year before last. He said the sale didn't come in like he expected, and Thorne said the market was soft. He paused. Ed Calloway said something similar. Will they talk to the judge? I don't know. Maybe, if someone asked them. She nodded. Then someone should ask them. She went with Caleb to see Tom Briggs that afternoon, and they came away with enough that she wrote 3 pages of notes on the wagon ride home, with her fingers going numb from the cold and the pencil skipping on the rough road. Ed Calloway. They found the next morning, and he was angrier about it than Briggs had been. The kind of anger that had been sitting quietly for 2 years looking for somewhere to go. Judge Carver saw them on a Thursday. He read the letter. He read the documentation Clara laid out beside it. He listened to Caleb's account of the Briggs and Calloway situations, and he asked several questions that were precise in the way of a man who has already formed a hypothesis and is looking for its edges. At the end, he looked at the letter again. Mr. Thorne's attorney is Robert Peel, he said. Peel is competent, but he does not take cases he believes he'll lose. The fact that this letter was written at all suggests Thorne believes the verbal agreement claim is arguable. He paused. It is not. Because there's no documentation to support it, Clara said. Because there's documentation that contradicts it. He looked at her. Your market research predates the sale by 3 weeks. If there had been a prior agreement with Thorne, you wouldn't have conducted that research. He set the papers down. I'll communicate with Peel directly. I suspect the matter will not advance to formal proceedings. Clara let out a slow breath. However, Carver said, and she knew from his tone that this was the part that cost something. If the Briggs and Calloway situations are what they appear to be, this is a pattern. A pattern is a different kind of matter than a single disputed transaction. What would it take to address the pattern? Caleb asked. Carver looked at him steadily. Documentation from those ranchers, a formal statement of what occurred, and a willingness to put their names to it. He paused. That's a harder thing to ask than coming to see me yourself. I know, Caleb said. Will they do it? Caleb looked at Clara. Calloway will, she said. Briggs will need more time. Carver nodded. Then get me what you can. They drove home through the December cold with the mountains holding the last of the light and the road hard and pale under the wagon wheels. And Clara's notes were in her lap, and her mind was working through the next steps the way it always worked. In order, without skipping, one thing following from the last. You were different in there than the first time, Caleb said. She looked at him. First time you went to prove something. This time you went to do something. He kept his eyes on the road. Different quality. She thought about that. He was right, she thought, though she hadn't framed it that way herself. The first visit had been defensive. Here's the evidence. Here's the case for my integrity. This visit had been something else. Not about her at all. About Briggs and Calloway and the pattern that had run through this county unaddressed because the men affected had nothing in writing and no one with the specific kind of patience required to build a documented case from available evidence. She had that patience. She had always had it. She had just spent most of her life deploying it in service of survival. It turned out it worked equally well, deployed in service of something larger. Briggs came to the judge in February, after Clara spent 2 separate afternoons at his kitchen table talking through what he remembered and what could be reconstructed and what the judge needed from him specifically. He was a stubborn man and a proud one, and asking for legal help was not his natural inclination, but she had found the right argument eventually. Not that he owed it to himself, but that he owed it to the next rancher Thorne would find without records. That was the argument that moved him. By March, Carver had enough. Thorne's attorney withdrew the letter against the Ryder Ranch without comment, which was Peel communicating, in the clean language of legal withdrawal, that the case had evaporated, and the broader matter moved into the kind of official process that was slow and undramatic and would not resolve in a single moment, but would resolve methodically, documentably, in the way that things resolved when someone had done the work of making them undeniable. Thorne did not leave Silver Ridge. He was still there, still civil in the nodding way, still the man who had built a fine house on the west edge of town. But something had shifted in how the town held him, the small degree of tilt that happens when a place learns something it can't unknow. Clara did not feel triumph about it. She felt the particular satisfaction of a balanced ledger. Not pleasure in the victory, but relief that the numbers had come out honest. Spring came late to Silver Ridge that year, but it came completely. The garden went in the second week of April, Clara and Anna together, on a Saturday morning when the ground had finally softened enough to work. They had planned it through the winter on paper, the two of them sitting at the kitchen table on evenings when Eli was doing his schoolwork and Caleb was reading or mending something. The garden plan spread out between them like a small territory they were claiming jointly. Anna had opinions, which Clara encouraged rather than managed. The tomatoes in the same beds as last year, the purple-flowered thing, which Clara had identified through the winter as lavender, in the south corner where it would get the afternoon sun. A row of beans along the east fence, which was Anna's addition, and which Clara thought was an excellent idea because beans were practical, and practical things had a beauty of their own. They worked through the morning without hurrying, and the sun came in stages the way spring sun does in high country, tentative, then real, then generous. Eli appeared after an hour and offered to help and was given the task of carrying water from the pump, which he did with more enthusiasm than the previous year's fence post observations had suggested he possessed for manual labor. Caleb came out at midday and stood at the edge of the garden and looked at it for a moment with an expression Clara had learned to read. The look of a man who has seen two things at once, the present thing and the past one, and is finding a way to hold both without dropping either. He did not say anything, but he stayed at the edge for a while before he went back to the yard. And Clara saw Anna notice this and say nothing and go back to her planting, and she thought, that girl has learned something about the kinds of quiet that don't need filling. She had perhaps helped with that. She hoped so. The lavender went in last, in the south corner, and when they were done, Anna stood back and looked at the whole of it with the satisfaction of someone who has made something and knows it. It's better than last year, she said. It will be better still next year, Clara said. That's how gardens work. They improve with time. Anna looked at it. Mama's been out here every spring then, she said, quietly, half to herself. In the plants. Clara looked at the east garden, at the beds they'd planned together, at the lavender in the south corner, at the beans along the fence, at all of it. Yes, she said. I think that's right. Anna nodded once, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough, Sab. There is something the frontier teaches that softer places cannot, and it is this. You do not find out who you are in the easy seasons. You find out in February, when you have $41 and nowhere to go and the cold is a living thing and the town is already turned away. You find out in the moments before you make the choice you can't take back, when fear and desire are the same temperature and you have to decide which one you trust. Clara Bennett had arrived in Silver Ridge with nothing she could count on except the arithmetic of her own capabilities, and she had counted on it when she had nothing else. That was not a small thing. Most people never discover what they're made of because they never have to, and some of them are fortunate in that, and some of them miss something they can't name. She had not chosen the easier path, and the easier path had been genuinely easy, and she had turned from it anyway. Not because the hard thing was more virtuous, but because it was more true. True to what she actually wanted, to what she had discovered in a ranch kitchen on Saturday mornings she hadn't expected to matter. The greatest risk she had faced in Silver Ridge was not poverty or isolation or Gerald Thorne's legal maneuvering. The greatest risk was the simpler, quieter one, choosing comfort over the life she recognized as hers. She had known enough people who made the other choice, who took the safe arrangement and found, a decade later, that safety had its own cost, that a life organized around the avoidance of loss has a particular hollowness that no amount of comfort fills. She did not judge them. She understood the logic. She had stood very close to that logic herself, on a narrow bed in a room above a tailor's shop, running the arithmetic in the dark. What Anna had said about her mother, she liked people who did things instead of talked about doing things, was not something Clara had been trying to be. It was simply what she was. She had forgotten it, somewhere in the years of difficult circumstances and careful survival, and Silver Ridge had given it back to her. The accounts, the cattle sale, the judge's office, the garden. All of it just doing the thing that needed doing, with whatever she had available. That was the lesson she would carry, if lessons were the right word for something you live rather than learn. That the person you are is not something circumstances reveal. It is something you build, day after day, in the choices you make when the options run from bad to uncertain, and there is no guaranteed outcome on any of them. She had built herself in a frontier town in Colorado in February, out of $41 and the refusal to stop moving. She did not regret a day of it, including the hardest ones, especially those. One evening in late May, after the supper dishes were done and the children were inside and the spring evening was long and warm, in the way that earned the whole winter of waiting, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch steps, not talking. They had gotten good at the not talking that was still a form of presence, the particular quality of two people who have nothing to prove to each other and nothing to manage, and can simply be in the same place without filling it. The mountains were clear against the evening sky. The high ranges still carrying snow in their uppermost reaches, even in May, holding it the way things hold what they are despite the season. Silver Ridge was visible down the road, the lights beginning to show as the dark came in from the east. Margaret's lamp, probably. Mrs. Hartwell's hotel. The general store. Her town. She had not come here to belong anywhere. She had come here because there was nowhere else left to go. And the place had opened up in ways she hadn't been equipped to expect, and she had walked through the opening because she had learned, slowly and at some cost, that the thing that terrifies you and the thing you want are often the same door. The north fence, Caleb said. I know, she said. Spring list. It's on the list. He was quiet. Then, you're happy. It was not a question exactly, More an observation offered as a question to give her room to correct it. She looked at the mountains. At the garden on the east side, visible from the porch, the beans already showing their first green. At the lamp in the kitchen window, at the hand resting on the step beside her own. Yes, she said. Not the simple kind. But yes. He nodded. That was enough. It was always enough. The evening settled in around them, and the spring dark came up from the east slow and warm, and the ranch was quiet with the specific quiet of a place that has found its rhythm after a long displacement. Not silence, but all the right sounds in all the right places. Animals settled. A door. Eli's voice inside, saying something to Anna. Anna's answer. Clara sat on the porch steps of a ranch in Colorado that had once been falling apart and was now not fixed. Nothing was ever fully fixed, but tended, cared for in the daily way, the unglamorous and necessary way, by people who had decided it was worth caring for. She had come here with $41 and a dead man's address and the cold at her back. She had built this, not alone, but she had built it. That was enough. That was, it turned out, everything.